Hello and welcome to another tutorial. In today's tutorial I'm going to need to do some architecture. My king here in his pillar is going to need a piece of architecture in there on this piece. It's going to be a stone piece of architecture, and I'll show you how is one way we can do that. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is get yourself an idea, of course, of what you're going to make. And then on this border here I've drawn up the same size as the piece of architecture that it's going to go into, and then I've used some clay to make up my model. You can use some Play-Doh, but we're not going to use plasticine because I'm going to make a mold out of wax, and the plasticine is made out of wax and clay, so the plasticine will stick to the wax mold. So clay is good. So the next thing, after we've made our little little model, we're going to take all the little odd bits and pieces of candles that we've got and very carefully melt them in the stove. Now make sure you do not burn yourself. And I have a brush here that I'm going to be using shortly. So when that's melted, it doesn't have to be hot, just melted. Now, having melted the wax so that it's just melted but not too hot, I'm going to take my brush and then very carefully dab it over there and get the wax into all the little crevices. Now, the first coat is probably the most important because you want to get it into all of the crevices and you don't want any bubbles or anything like that. So while it's reasonably warm, the wax, that's when you want to get it into all those little crevices, so you're going to get a good mold. Now once I've done that, just as a sometimes it's necessary to put a little bit of a border around so that we can get some clean edges, so I'm just using some clay just so that any of the soft wax doesn't go running all over the desktop or anything. So once we've got our wall around, we can just make sure that the wax is getting into all of the nooks and crannies, and then we're just going to build up layers of wax until we get a reasonable little block. In fact, when it gets cooler, you can literally pour that in there on top. And if what you're trying to mold is not flat like this and it's three-dimensional, you've just got to keep painting layers on and painting and painting and painting until you get a reasonable thing. I like to get at least a centimetre or a half an inch worth of wax onto whatever you're trying to do. Sometimes if it looks like it's going to be a little bit not very strong, you can just add a few little bits of sticks, like some kebab sticks or something, and just to add a bit of strength. And then just keep building up around those sticks so that they're going to stick. It helps to give a little bit of strength if your mold's fairly wide. So after it's dry, set or cooled down nicely, we can take all the clay borders away. And you'll see it'll keep it reasonably neat and tidy. Now while I'm doing this, there is a reason why I'm using wax rather than plaster. You can make these molds in plaster and you can use them over and over and over again, but in this case the wax, we can reuse it. After we've made as many as we need, we can break it up and melt it and use it again. So now hopefully it will come off. Maybe need to bend the board a little more. Yes, it's come free. It's probably just the clay is sticking to the board. Right, after we've taken out the clay, we want to just use a brush and some water and just carefully and gently brush all the excess clay out, so just clean up your mold. Using a brush helps that it doesn't hurt the wax. And we're just going to cleaning it up until it's clean. Here we have the mold nice and finished. A about this time you can go around and just check that there are no undercuts like around the edges here, and just scrape them back just to make sure there's no serious undercuts, but everything seems to be pretty reasonable in this case. And if there are any holes that might have been missed, well, you can get a blade or something, heat it and then smooth it over, melt and make repairs. Like here might need something. Once your mold is ready to go and take as many molds as it will last out to, you should, if you do a few dozen if you like, the next thing is to take some toilet paper and split it into its plies, and then you can then put a first coat there with white glue. I just put it straight on, and then the first coat you use your wet brush just to get into the things. It just means it won't stick quite as much. Because it's wax, the paper generally doesn't stick anyway, but just in case the glue wants to stick at all, well, you're just going to be wetting it so that it's going to go right down into the crevices and everything. Now, once you get all over that, just with your brush, you're pushing it right down into the details, because this toilet paper layer is going to be the layer that's going to take all the detail for you. So you can use, and I like to do maybe 3 or 4 coats of those just to build up that layer, and of course you're just pouncing it down into the detail. Once you have got your toilet paper more or less on there and dry, it's time to put some photocopy paper layers. Now with the photocopy paper, it will tear better one way or another. It'll have a grain. It'll tear, see, one way it will tear better than the other. So tear it across the grain, because we're going to, not with the grain, paint it with your glue, white Elmer's glue with about 50-50 water to glue mix. And the reason for putting on that there, it will eventually go reasonably soft once it starts to wet, and you can get little strips like this, and then that little strips will go on better and easier over the bumps and lumps, a lot quicker and better than big square bits. So you're able to get into your pieces better, and you just use it like you would any sticky tape, and that way you can go crisscrossing all over with the photocopy paper. Now put about 3 or 4 layers on would be a good idea to be able to give enough strength and support to your toilet paper layers. Right, the last layers don't have to be quite so particular, but I put 3, 4, maybe even 5 layers just to get that thing. Then you'll find that as it dries, it will carefully peel out of there, and if you're careful, it will come out little by little. It may be a little bit sticky, but being wax, it will eventually peel out if you're careful, and there we are on the final thing. You can, if you want a little bit stronger, just plop it back into the mold and add some extra layers very quickly, but I think with about 4 or 5 layers that should be enough. Once it really dries, it'll be quite cardboardy, and then I'll stick that on my architecture and paint it.